Hello, I'm Catherine Byers-White, your host for the Los Altos History Show. We're going to be talking with Steve Acet this evening about touring the downtown area of Los Altos with the help of this brochure. Steve has a background in architecture and art history, and has been involved with the Historical Commission of Los Altos for 15 years. Steve has been chair of the commission and has also been involved with other preservation groups, such as the Committee to Save Griffin House here on Foothill College campus. Steve is a designer who owns his own business called the Remodeling Project. Welcome, Steve. It seems as though you come by this interest in local history and architecture quite naturally. How was your interest in architecture and art history first ignited, and what in particular interests you about this area's local history?
I'm the son of a builder who built a particular style of house, and when I was growing up, I grew up in an area of Atherton called Lindenwood, which at the time was mostly mustard fields and confined inside some brick walls that were the fence for the flood estate. And there was a number of artifacts left. The large flood estate had been demolished, but there were a number of things still left in the area that I grew up in, old gas light lamps and swimming pools and fish ponds and gatehouses and gates, and we used to sneak into the old gatehouse and rummage through the records of the Stanford family that were stored there and about and around, and so the combination of the two, I'm sure, was something that came to me early in my life. And in Los Altos here, it's an interesting town because of the diversity of development that's happened over the last 100 years, and that it's been a gradual evolution of housing styles predominantly, that there's evidence of different houses and different periods of development scattered throughout the town, mixing constantly and constantly changing. So that's mostly what I see as of interest in this town, including some fine, very old buildings.
Yes, there are, aren't there? Well, tell me a little bit about the walking tour brochure. Who sponsored it and how did it come about?
The walking tour brochure was developed in the mid-'80s. Wolf Schrader on the Historical Commission was primarily responsible for it, as well as the other commissioners. And an old-timer, a resident that had grown up in town, had written a book, Ed Woodworth, called The Birth of a Town, and that sort of served as the instigator for the walking tour brochure. And so by developing the brochure, it was intended to be a guide, an educational tool, and a way of informing the public of some of the old fabric of the beginnings of the town that are still here and still affecting the development.
Steve, about 3 weeks ago, we met and took a mini tour of the downtown area, and we want to roll that tape for our viewers later on. But before we do that, I wanted to get some pointers from you about how to go about the tour, and how long does the tour take?
You could probably take 2 hours easily to do it. The downtown area, you could start at the Chamber of Commerce to get the brochure, but the downtown area is essentially a triangle going down Main Street 4 or 5 blocks until you get to State, and you can come back up and then come back across First Street to rejoin Main. That's the heart of the downtown portion of the tour that is referred to in the guide. And then in addition, across Foothill, there's the residential area, which you could also walk through or drive through if you wanted to. It's intended to be a walking community, so a walk would be fine. Or, and then there's some other buildings around the periphery of that area that could also be seen that are shown in the guide.
Thank you. I know that Los Altos is a somewhat unique town in that it was founded and the nucleus of this town was built in a relatively short period of time, was it not?
Yes, the beginnings of town and the events that gave it its form today, or the major events that gave it its form, happened right after the turn of the century. In 1906, the Southern Pacific Railroad decided that a spur running along the western side of the valley would be an appropriate venture for them, and they needed a station someplace between the Los Gatos station and the Palo Alto station, and so they came in and bought a large farm, 100-plus acre farm from Sarah Winchester. Her sister, Isabel Merriman, lived on the farm with her husband, and it was predominantly a hay field at the time that Southern Pacific bought it. They brought two lines into the area, both a steam line first and then an electric line that connected with the line from San Jose to the Vasona station in Los Gatos. So, but in 1906 they bought the property from Sarah Winchester, and in 1907 the steam line had been started between Mayfield and Los Altos and had arrived in Los Altos by 1908. Southern Pacific turned over the sale of the land in Los Altos in that parcel of land that they bought from Sarah Winchester. It was subdivided, and the town was laid out centering around the train station, or the proposed train station, and given a residential half and a downtown commercial area. The first buildings were put up in 1908, 9, 10. The school was in 11. The water and electric were in 1908, and the phone service came in the next year, and buildings were going up in the University Orange Avenue area across the street from the train station. And so it was this flurry of activity, and the much of the planning that was done then remains today and gives us the form of the downtown area and the University Orange Avenue area. And the Foothill Expressway, which is the old train line, still forms the spine of the community.
Huh. Well, how is Los Altos different from, let's say, Mountain View or Palo Alto?
Mountain View and Palo Alto both have more of an orientation towards commercial development and industrial development. Los Altos was always seen more as a suburban community, providing healthy benefits of living at the turn of the century. It was very popular to move to the country as part of the suburban movement, to move to the country and live outside in the fresh air and in the fields and have your apricots growing and run about in the mustard fields and whatnot, so that this was very popular. And actually, as Stanford became more popular, some of the professors moved in to the area to adopt this lifestyle. And so Los Altos has always maintained that distinction. Mountain View was more oriented towards the bay and towards the commercial. It was a port on the bay and also a stagecoach stop, and Palo Alto became more oriented towards Stanford. And so.
Well, on our tour, we weren't able to get around to the residential areas, unfortunately. Could you talk a little bit about the sites over in that area, that Sarah Winchester's house?
Right. Sarah Winchester's house is the oldest, or her sister's, where her sister lived. Sarah undoubtedly supported it enthusiastically. It was an old house built, we're not sure when, maybe as early as the 1860s. It was a small house, and then it was, when Sarah Winchester bought it, it was enlarged much like the Winchester house was, although it's not nearly as large. And it's done in the Queen Anne style, and her sister and her husband and their daughter lived there, and they had a variety of crops. And that house has been recently remodeled and is on our landmark list, and as part of, there's an agreement that will keep it that way, the Mills Act agreement that we've entered into with the owners. And there's also a number of other houses in the University Orange Avenue area that are done in the Craftsman era, which is more the turn of the century style of architecture. That the arts and crafts movement was started in England, but it sort of reached its flowering in California, and we have quite a few houses that were built in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, 1900s to 1920s and 30s even, that show this style, and there's a concentration of them in the Orange Avenue area, University Avenue area.
From your perspective, which home stands out to you as being the most architecturally unique? Being interested in art history and architecture, I thought you might have one of your favorites in mind.
One of the founding fathers' houses on University Avenue is the Paul Schaap House, which was designed by Wolf and Mackenzie, which was a firm in San Jose. They did the development of Hatchet Park in San Jose, and I think another development up in Palo Alto, and Paul Schaap came in, and that's a wonderful house. Gable-ended, shingled house with a number of characteristics that make it clearly identifiable as Mackenzie, as well as we have documentation that he was the architect as well. But
it sounds like a must-see. Let me ask you this. You talked a little bit about the founding of the city. What unique tidbits could you give us about that time period that would interest our viewers? I know you had talked about the train station and how that's changed hands many times over. And
right, the train station was really, that's a 1913, I believe, building, and it was recognized for its architectural style, and it became sort of like the meeting place for town, and the kids hung out there, and there was olive orchards, and a big oak tree used to stand between the train station and what is now the Kentucky Fried Chicken in the island at the entrance to the downtown area, and that was actually the horses were tethered there, and people met there, and so there's that aspect, and I guess the old timers always talk about playing football in the fields, and right where this building is now, and that's where the football field was, and kids used to just meet and play there, and we can still see the orchard around City Hall, and see some of gives some of the inkling of what the entire area was like. Yeah,
it's good that it hasn't changed too much.
There's quite a few changes. There's still some remembrances.
I know we went by Ramsey's Garage. Can you give me a little bit about the history of Ramsey's Garage? I found that in the Copeland building particularly interesting.
Yeah. Ramsey's Garage, as well as the grocery store and the bank on the corner of First and Main, and the Copeland building across the street, were all done in the Mission Revival style, with the arcaded top, and it was very popular at that time that they were built, and I'm sure that there was an intention to be current in what was being promoted as a new town, and that was a large building, remarkably large for the time it was built. It's probably, I don't know, 10 times the size of the Copeland building. And, So there were a lot of activities across the road from it that were related to the train, electric station and switching stations, and some loading docks.
What do you think Los Altans can do to help preserve the history of Los Altos? Could you tell us a little bit maybe about the Historical Commission and other committees that are working to preserve Los Altos and what's left of its original form?
The Historical Commission is, we're actively engaged in doing what we can to educate and make people aware, and that's keep your eyes open, see what's around you, try to figure out where it came from is probably the most important thing, and then as you get to know more about the old houses and the names of the streets and whatnot, that you'll get more involved in it. In addition to that, there's also the association, the History House Association, which is a group of interested members of the town who participate in a number of activities that help promote the history of town, including essay contests that the school kids do every year, and exhibits that they put on at History House, which is behind the library. It's the old Gilbert Smith house. He was the house that was built in 1906 in another shingle house. It isn't truly craftsman, it's more vernacular form, but wonderful place. And it's still there, and oak trees, and we have receptions for the old timers there and get to hear their stories and collect the information. And there's also projects that go on with the schools, and certainly getting involved with History House, the association, in helping collect and gather material on the history of town and updating the archives. And so there's plenty to do.
It sounds like it, Steve.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Time's gone by so quickly, as it always does. But thank you for giving us background on the history of Los Altos and the walking tour brochure. As I mentioned earlier, Steve and I met several weeks ago to take a condensed version of the walking tour of Los Altos. And Steve was able to point out several buildings in town that have historical significance for Los Altans, and share some of his expertise about the histories and architectures. We're going to put together a sample of what to expect on your walking tour of Los Altos from our walking tour, and we hope you enjoy this taste of Los Altos history. But until next time, goodbye, and thanks for watching the Los Altos History Show. Let's roll that tape. Steve and I met at a city park close to the downtown area of Los Altos to begin our walking tour. From Lincoln Park, we walked along University Avenue, one of the oldest residential streets in Los Altos, to the Chamber of Commerce building, where if you're interested, you can pick up a walking tour brochure. Steve pointed out that the Chamber building was built by a locally prominent architect, Goodwin Steinberg. It is Steinberg's first building, built in 1961. It is a small building, but is considered a classic because of its form. It shows some Japanese influences in the sweep of the roof, its modular elements, and in the proportions of the building and in the way the windows were handled. According to Steve, it is quite possibly a future landmark. From the Chamber building, Steve and I walked to the intersection of Foothill Expressway and crossed over to the business area of town known as Main Street. Foothill Expressway was once a train track bed for the electric and steam railroads that once served Los Altos. Steve shared with us that Los Altos was originally laid out as a pedestrian town with residences, transportation, and commerce well within walking distances from one another. Now, of course, with the automobile as the main mode of transportation, that original intent is somewhat lost, although people still consider being within walking, biking, or rollerblading distance of town a definite plus. Our first stop in town is the train depot, built in 1913. Steve told us that the Southern Pacific architects considered the Los Altos station a nationally recognized model that had strong potential to be copied elsewhere. The station itself had craftsman influences, as well as some Spanish influences, some say. The station was used as a train depot until 1960, when it was closed because of the decline of the railroad and the building of Foothill Expressway. Since then, the building has been used as a restaurant, a bank, and now an antique store. The train station is designated locally as an important historical landmark and is considered eligible for designation on the National Register of Historic Places. The Copeland Building was built in 1911, preceded by 3 other buildings. Steve told us this building was once the town post office, as well as a drugstore and soda shop. The upstairs floor was once a hotel and then became the headquarters for the return of the Los Altos Star, the original newspaper in town, precursor to the present-day paper, the Town Crier. Steve told us that the garage was torn down in 1983. It originally served as a feed and fuel store. In 1923, George Ramsey and a partner bought it, and it became known as Ramsey's Garage, or the Los Altos Garage. It was a very large barn-like building. Ramsey also bought a Model A fire engine, which replaced the old soda cart, which had served as the town's only firefighting equipment up to that time. So it has also served as the town's volunteer fire station. In the early 1980s, the city's planning department developed some design guidelines for the present structures to resemble the character and form of the former, with similar roof lines and angles. The buildings have been architecturally recognized as appropriate structures to resemble the former buildings. From the garage site, we walked from State Street and First Street back to Main Street to one of the first buildings built in town. We're on Main Street, standing in the doorway of what used to be Shout Hall.
Correct. After the founding fathers of the downtown area, the Shout brothers were Southern Pacific Railroad executives that were instrumental in bringing the train to this location and in the development of the town. The Shout building was the second building built in town about 1909, 1910, and housed a variety of activities, including the Boy Scouts. Upstairs was used for meeting rooms as a grocery store, and the first school rooms were here, and the Boy Scouts met here, and it now houses a collection of old photos from the area. The building is pretty much as it was originally. The awnings that are on the outside of the buildings were added to help control sun, and so the building was a lot flatter originally, and the original entrance was a corner entrance to the building rather than the offset entrance. So the front entrance has been altered a bit, and the awnings are new, but other than that, the building stands pretty much as it was originally.
Steve pointed out this plaque identifying Shout Hall as the first elementary school building in Los Altos. There are 5 such designated buildings in downtown Los Altos. Steve told us this building is still largely intact. The storefront is original, the transom windows and awning are original, the building's awning is hidden behind the facade of the building, and the interior walls are built entirely of wood. Steve, I'm really glad we had an opportunity to get out today and tour Altos. If you are going for a tour here in Los Altos, we really just scratched the surface. There are many, many sites to see, many that are nearby but need to be driven to. If you are interested in doing this, I would say, plan a few hours?
A couple hours to get around. The San Antonio Club is down San Antonio Road, one of our local meeting halls, and there are other. It's fun to drive through the University and Orange Avenue area, see a lot of the older houses, shops houses, and a lot of craftsman houses, a variety of styles. Winchester's house is still in town.
I thank Steve for being such a delightful and informative tour guide. This just gives you a taste of what the tour holds in store for you. Why don't you give it a try?